Integrating with the Landscape with Peter May. His talk will show perspectives on how to move more sustainably and live in the Crestone area. One of the key components will be integrating with nature instead of fighting with nature. And that's interesting because we had a lead-in with our panel talking a little about that a few minutes ago. This includes returning to certain keystone species to our area, namely the beaver population. A little bit about Peter. Peter May grew up in Michigan. He received a BS in architecture and has lived in the Crestone area since 1993 when he began building solar straw bale houses and greenhouses. His other endeavors include landscape design, forest and fire management, botanical alchemies, music, mountain guiding, meditation instruction, and Nordic ski racing, among others. And he's been living off the grid for over 25 years. So if you'd please welcome Peter May.
Thank you, Kim. So it's been, since '93, it was my first energy fair festival. And there are a few of us building the first wave of straw bale houses. And it's been a while. We know they work. You know, it's kind of one of those interesting things when you hear about straw bale houses working in Nebraska. Will they work here? And yes, they work. And since then, we have numerous straw bale houses, earthships, all kinds of alternatives. And yes, the off-the-grid living works as well. And so early on, the Energy Festival concentrated on off-grid living, sustainable housing, and I think we've progressed a bit here, so it's really good. And today I want to talk about our other home, which is our shared landscape, and how do we live here in the best way. And you might see me looking at my phone because I have a number of things I don't want to forget to say. And to you, it might be more like puzzle pieces, because to me, they're like puzzle pieces. And living here for so long, there's people here that have lived here all their lives, so I still kind of seem like, to myself, I'm still new here, if you know what I mean. Even though I've been here for a while, it doesn't seem so, even though there's been a lot of things that have happened. And I've noticed a lot of things. And to talk today might be brief, and so if you have questions, I have a little booth over here, and we're raising money to bring back the beavers, and I'm selling Q-tonic, so we can continue our conversation. And also, we have a new Facebook dialogue page. It's called E3 Ecologic, and people are encouraged to post about how to take care of our landscape. And if any of you wildcraft, I want to give you kind of like the first kind of like, how do you wildcraft and give in return, if you know what I mean? We're taking from the landscape, but then how do we give back? And many of the people I work with in the region, and we make medicines together, it's how do we actually take care of the forest? You know, if we're taking things from the forest, how do we, like if we're harvesting OSHA, how do we give back to the OSHA? Many of us have the belief that there'll always be OSHA there, or there'll always be pinyon nuts, or there'll always be herbs. But how do we actually ensure that? And so over time here, many of you know I got involved with the fire department in 1993, and we kind of brought it up into the modern age. I saw a few people that were on the department then, and back then we could get the fire trucks there, but we really didn't deal with the landscape fires. And so over time, we start to gradually get better and better at working with fire, wildfire. And over the few minutes of this talk, I'm going to start giving you puzzle pieces. And because some people said, well, we don't really need that. We don't have fires like that. You know, the last big fire here, if anyone knows, was the 1880s. And a fire came, I believe, from the north. And all the people at the time would fight it who were available, and they fought it for 2 weeks. And if you go to South Crestone Creek, you can see the fire scar on the big old Ponderosa. And if you go up any of these creeks, you'll see that there's fire scars. And North Crestone, when that one burned, that's why we have so many aspens there, because aspens recolonize. And if you go all the way to the top, those trees haven't really come back yet, all the way to the very top. So there's a lot of things that we may want to become aware of living here and the influences that came on here. Many of us have come here because of the beautiful nature, and many of us believe that it's pristine in effect. And I believe it's pristine because it's nature. Is it pristine, though, in the way it could be? And I'm going to start to give you kind of hints that I've come across, and I would encourage you to challenge me. And because we kind of want to figure this out so we don't have to live in such high fire danger, risk, or flood danger. And we can actually learn to live with the forest and how to give back to the forest and how the forest can give to us as well. Some of us know that through working with the forest and reducing the fuel load, we started to utilize the slash materials. Those oils and hydrosols have gone on to heal countless people now. They're helping to keep people more well, especially in the last couple years of the pandemic. And it's really kind of driving home is when we learn how to really take care of the forest, it can actually take care of us for real. And we're starting to, one of the most beautiful things about Crestone is we have the openness of new ideas from other places, other dimensions. And I think what we're working on is integrating those to see if they're real. So on the E3 Ecologic site, when you post something, I'm going to ask you to post if it's your experience, if it's a study, or if it's your belief. That way, if it's your belief, I don't know if anyone's going to challenge it. I don't want to challenge your belief. If it's your experience, do you have a picture to show it? Is it a study? Can you cite the study? That way we can kind of cut through the challenges that kind of get in the way of communication, especially, on the computer and on the internet. So I'm going to grab my phone here because I have my list of puzzle pieces I want to share with you. And as Kim introduced, this is about beavers. And I'm going to give you it's about bison, it's about many things that could be here but are not. And it's becoming important because some of the PhDs are studying the effects that beaver have on landscapes. And now we see it up at Cameron Peaks Fire and the East Troublesome Fire. Those are called megafires because of the amount of acreage they burn in the amount of time. I remember driving to the Front Range, and I saw the East Troublesome Fire blow up. And being a firefighter, we know that that's not usual to have 100,000 acres burn in one day, right? And so when they went back and studied it, she found, Emily Fairfax is her name, she found that there were about 500 beaver dams in that area, affected area. And basically that whole network of beaver dams kept those areas from burning. And we know as firefighters that we want to have a few things in place. Lookouts is one of them when we're on a fire, or if there's a fire around. Lookouts is one of them. Communication, escape routes, and safety zones. And so beavers, in a sense, provide that for the animals in the forest. And she's got documentation showing that yes, the bears went to those places. Without them, the animals don't have it. So we're going to back up now. Why am I talking about beavers? Yay, beavers. Beavers, through the fur trade, were trapped out, probably roughly estimates between 600 or 60 million, if not more, maybe in the hundreds of millions. And it's interesting because it wasn't like a mink, even though minks are important too, for their fur coats, but they're the water stewards. They're the ones that trap the water. They're the ones that actually can hydrate the system. And because of their wonderful fur, they were made into top hats. Just look at Abraham Lincoln. He wore one. Look at all those folks back then. They were wearing them. And the estimate when we did this, we started our our campaign, in a sense, to bring back beavers. And actually, when Paul Winter was here, when we did the Crestone CD in 2006, because we celebrated both the beaver and the bison as keystone species that are missing, as well as the indicator species of the cranes. But then in 2012, we had the Crestone Beaver Fest, and it might be time for another one next year. About 80,000, maybe, beavers were trapped out of the valley. And one of my first experiences here swimming at the end of Two Trees was that I brought my friends. I found this great pond, and there was a 9-foot-high dam. And I jumped in, and I hadn't seen it, but I knew the beavers were there. And a beaver came out and started swimming with me. And my friends yell, "Be careful, he might bite you." I said, "I don't think he's going to bite me." He didn't. But it's just that the beavers were here. And then we think of this landscape here as this very pristine, unchanging place, which I happen to have photographic evidence that it is changing. And if you want to know the history, there's some good books up at the Merck, Drilling, Loading, and Firing, and a few other Crestone history books. And it talks about how this place was mined, independent mine, as well as other mines. It was logged, it was grazed, and it was probably grazed in an unrestricted way, which cows like to eat, the grasses, and they also like to eat the riparian vegetation, which the beaver need. It was also a place where the water was diverted, and it's still being diverted to this day, and it's being sought after by Douglas County, if that's still going on. So there's a lot of things that are not apparent. And so I have a photograph later, if you'd like to see, of how the stables just here has changed in the last probably 50 years. How the trees are now gone, the cottonwoods. And this is a puzzle piece. Like, why did the trees go? Did the horses eat them? I don't think so. Okay. But what else changed? Next time you go into Aventa, they have a nice picture of 1900, I think, downtown Crestone. Take a look at the mountains, take a look at all the vegetation on the mountains, and then just go outside and look down right here, the road right here. It's going to be different. Now, why is it all changing? Why is it changing? Is it something that we should pay attention to? I was just in Sedona a few days ago, and I got to drive by Flagstaff, and they have an experimental station. And early on, they brought in the sheep because they found that they had these giant ponderosas, big, great for lumber and everything. And so they decided that, the sheep eat the grass. And so that means they get a lot of regeneration of the trees. And so they brought in the sheep, they ate all the grass, they didn't eat the ponderosa seedlings. And so what they got is hundreds and hundreds of little tiny ponderosas. And so they have it all fenced off. And so 80 years later, here's the scientist. He says to me, "Do you see all those little trees?" And they're about this big. He said, "How old do you think they are?" I said, maybe 10 years or so. He said, "No, all of them are 80 years old. That's how big they get." And so I don't want to break anybody's dream here, but our forest was probably planted by cows because they ate the grass. And when they eat the grass, the trees come up because they have less competition. When we go in and we reduce the fuel, we're actually taking place of what we would call a clean-out fire or a low-intensity fire. So, moving on. I have these interesting pictures if you'd like to see them. Back to the beavers now. I got to swim with a beaver. Soon after that, Gary Boyce, if you remember him, I don't know if some of you do. I didn't know I'd become a history book, at least for a short amount of time here. He bought the ranch, and he wanted to put it back in the great days of the cattle ranch. I think there were longhorns here in the 50s. And his new piece of equipment that he got was this very amazing bulldozer with the tread wheels, the tread. And I happened to drive by him, and he got it out on Cottonwood Creek. And what he was doing was he was destroying all of the beaver dams that were there. And there was nothing, I didn't even know what to do. We didn't have our phones handy like we do now. But there were probably maybe 10 beaver dams on that whole stretch. There were fish in the creek. And we heard that there was a beaver on Cottonwood just within the last few months, and I think that one's gone now. And so there's an interesting correlations. I'm going to give them to you as puzzle pieces. Is like we're facing these droughts, we're facing these mega fires, and what else is going on? The beavers that were once here are now gone in their numbers. And so I'm not going to say that's correlated, but I'm going to ask you to at least think about it. And because if that's the case, we also have effects of climate change. We have all kinds of effects. And climate change is what's causing it. Is it our pollution? No doubt it is having an effect. Is it the sun? Is it, who knows what it is? But one thing we do know is that the humans trapped out the beaver. And we can bring them back. And so to bring them back, it's not simple. Unfortunately, it's Colorado, it's water issues. And so we're on our way, though, to having the water decreed basically to nature, if it hasn't already been. We're already in this kind of, it's not a chess game, but it's just providing for nature in a sense. Like, can the beavers trap the water up on the national forest where it's appropriate to begin rehydrating the whole Baca, the whole Crestone area? And what we can see is, because the issue has come up, how do we mitigate our greenbelts, our riparian zones, our creek corridors? And I'm hitting on a number of things, and I'm trying to do it very gently. And perhaps, at least as far as Emily Fairfax is concerned, she would say the beavers are one of the best fire managers ever. So maybe we should bring them back, and instead of mitigating the greenbelts, maybe we should manage the beavers so that they can hydrate the system, and then the riparian zones become true fire breaks because it won't burn because it's too hydrated, even in droughts. As firefighters, we know to where to get waters where there's beavers because there's going to be water in the dams. They know because they put the water. This is opening up the proverbial can of worms of water rights, right? This is going to be a big deal. We're getting ready to do this. We finally have support of everyone. We started this in 2012. We got a license to trap live beavers in the valley. And a few folks came up to me. They were old timers, and they said, if you bring them back, we're going to kill them. Because they're seen as varmints. They're seen as something that takes, something that belongs to us. When in effect, the reality now and the science is that when beavers are present, yes, they cut down trees, and they cut down live trees. They also rehydrate the system. They also actually increase the water supply. They reduce fire danger. They bring back biodiversity. They're part of the system that has been in place for hundreds of thousands of years. And to think that we can take out a puzzle piece like that and be okay, I would ask you to think about that. That's like taking away fire from the system and thinking it's not going to burn. Whereas the fire actually, in the right way, can bring back the mycelium. The mycelium is living, and it can then absorb the water in the soil. It's not just a dead organic. It's a living system that can give it back as we need it. So I'm opening up this forum on E3 Ecologic and at the table today and when you see me, because I think there's some puzzle pieces that we're able to see now that are drastically out of balance that we can bring back, because we still have a chance. There's something called natural, let me get the right words here. There's something called natural inheritance of the land that we inherited. Like my tree on my land was burned, and it seemed like it was burned 3 times, and it's a mother tree. And when you feed it, it helps the other trees produce nuts. That's what's happening this season. And the Utes or the Apaches probably burned it. My trees, those trees in particular, have a cellular memory. So when I started doing fire, they knew right what to do. And that's why we're, in a sense, we're restoring the pinyon orchard here too. But we're bringing fire, and yes, we have an alternative, which many of you got with the mother tree food. But there's this idea of a natural inheritance that we still have remnants of. We still have remnants. If you drive down Two Tree, how many of you ever see the historic relic Gamble Oak, which are about this big. But why aren't there any other? You know, we're having these little glimpses of like, wait a minute, what happened here? Where we're sitting in a couple hundred years ago may have been a beaver pond because of the springs right here, right where we're sitting. And the importance of the beavers is that they're going to hydrate the system. We're throwing our system out of whack a little bit. And it kind of, there's a couple terms to kind of leave you with to think about. And one of them is land ignorance, because not all of us have lived here, and we don't have that cultural memory. And we're trying to put back the puzzle pieces so we can at least gain it. And we have the gift here of seeing and, in a sense, seeing into the dimensions. And there's another thing in the scientific community called ecological amnesia. And as I'm working with the wetlands people, I think there's still this uncertainty about beavers, right? Because they're far better than we are at restoring streams. And I'd like to give you guys a way to be part of this. We're forming a beaver brigade, and as you go on your hikes, if you could send me, if you have any photos of where beavers used to be, if you have actually sea beavers. A friend just sent one from San Isabel, and they're stumps that were obviously cut down by beavers, but they're all moss covered. It's been a while. And so in 2012 with Colorado College, with the course I taught, we surveyed from North Crestone all the way down to the sand dunes. And we found where they were there presently, and where they could be. And we're continuing that work now. And unfortunately, our beaver populations have gone down even further in the last 10 years. So what that's going to mean is less water, less hydration. And so I'm asking you to be part of our beaver brigade. We went for a grant. We're kind of new in the wetlands funding program, so they didn't give it to us. But we went for $15,000, but we're up to $4,000 in private donations, which I'm very thankful for, so we can continue the work. A lot of it's political. A lot of it's going to be going and camping out to see where we can actually bring in beavers that are problem beavers from the rest of the valley. Some of that's going to be going for what's called beaver dam analog, because you can't just bring beaver in and drop them. They tried that in Idaho. They dropped them off in parachutes and boxes open. They need a pond. They need a pond to be safe in. And I think it's probably one of the most important things we can do on a landscape level together. We already have about 20 or 30 people in the Beaver Brigade. We're getting information in, and I'm thinking this isn't something that's going to end in the next 10 years. This is hopefully we can pass on to the next people that are here, because the beaver are an integral part of this landscape. And without them, it's going to be really, really difficult to keep living here the way I think we would like to live here. Will there be challenges? Certainly. Many people who live around beavers go, oh, they cut down my trees, they flood things out. And is that what we have to trade for to make the rest of the landscape sustainable over time? I'm just throwing these things out as questions. Being in fire management for now 30 years, we have an ally. And that ally is on nature's team. And then hopefully we can be on nature's team too. And that doesn't just go for the beaver, that goes for bringing back the monarch. We have milkweed here, and in the 1970s study, 1978, there were so many monarchs in this region they couldn't even count them. And now, how many people have even seen a monarch? I haven't even seen one this year. Last year I saw a few, and that has to do with milkweed. And what does milkweed need? Milkweed needs something called beneficial rearrangement, or another scientific term is perturbation or disturbance. But the milkweed doesn't just grow out anywhere. It's where we actually interact. It's really interesting. It's like, what do these things need? And so a whole species is on the edge because we've forgotten our role, but we're also using all kinds of Roundup and things like that, which definitely takes that out. But I think we have the cohesiveness as a community tied with nature to begin with rehydrating with the beavers, if not the monarchs, and over time, bring back the butterfly gardens, the pollinator gardens. And one other key ingredient that's missing, and I know since I've already opened up the can of worms, and you can get the tomatoes out later and throw them at me, I'll probably eat them. is we don't have enough fire here. We're afraid. And that's going to kick us one of these days. And we need to make friends with fire. And we're doing a great job, reducing fuels, but then we need to go the next step, because fire doesn't burn down its own house. Where fire is, it already knows it. And if we're already adopted, we don't have to like be in as much fear. We can hopefully get into more of a form of integration. And we have so many tools here. It doesn't have to be just the physical fire. I'm speaking Crestone now. If you, I think you guys know that, right? We have many tools. It doesn't have to be a physical fire, but it does have to be an acknowledgement of the fire. It has to be acknowledgement that there are other beings here that depend on the system that has evolved over hundreds of thousands of years, and that as we come into our more awakened state, that hopefully we can share that with the landscape and repair some of the things, that were done out of, progress, mining, logging. We can do this together. We can do this together. And it is quite amazing when you do bring them back. On the CD, I don't know, maybe I have beaver medicine, because that's why I was able to swim with the beaver. On the CD, Paul Winter says, we featured the beaver. And I was at his place in Connecticut. Could you go out and ask the beaver for a sound? So I go out to his pond and I said, hey, beaver, would you like to be on the CD? And so I set up the recording device. And in about 10 minutes, it must almost touch my shoes, right? I'm right at the water's edge. And all I did was move my eyes in the pitch blackness, and it goes whap. And it did it twice. And so that's what's on that CD. And so, yes, that beaver won a Grammy as well. And that was probably, the beaver won, the bison won. Maybe we start with beaver. And if you need the science on this, I'm happy to share it with you. We have some handouts at my table. We'll talk about bison another time. They were also on the CD. They won a Grammy too. They sang specifically. And it's about the interaction. So, if you'd like to join the E3 Beaver Brigade, I have a sign up over there. There's no cost to join. We'll basically be going up when it's the right time to make the beaver ponds in the National Forest. That's what we're focusing on now. We'll be doing live trapping at some point this year. It will be next year because we're too late in the season. And we're also fundraising for this effort. And next year, they know that we're going to be applying for more money because it's becoming a bigger region. And it's not just us here. It's the whole valley. It's to the east of us, to the north, to the west, and to the south. It's kind of like a beaver mandala that I hope can be reinstated, and that we learn why it's important, and then to educate and working with the charter school to make sure that the students there, and with Moffat to make sure that they know why. So I have a couple photos. If you'd like to see, you can come up afterward. And thank you for your attention today. Yeah, for significant donations, you get a little beaver puppet. But here are the photos. And this is patterned after the work of John Fielder. And he went back and did photographs of W.H. Jackson. They're about 100 years apart. You can see those books. And it's amazing what you can learn by taking photos 100 years apart. And so we photo monitor just about all the work we do, so we know what's changing, why it's changing, trying to put the pieces together so we can use adaptive management. But I've got photos here of it's probably the 70s or 80s at the stables. And then in the 90s, so maybe the 2000s. So it's like 20 or 30 years, and you can see it's pretty significant. So if you want to come up, or maybe see me over there, that way the next speaker can begin. It's right over by Aventa. By the info, across from the info. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to dialoguing more.